Hilchos Nedarim Perek Shmini, the laws of vows, chapter 8. Today we're going to explore a special type of neder, special type of vow, and that's called on the screen Tole Nidro Bedavar, a contingent vow. In the neder, in the words that you formulated as the vow, you made a condition. And because you made a condition, so the vow only exists as long as the condition exists. It says that Rambam halacha aleph, Misha Nodarai Nishba, if somebody makes a vow or an oath, Upeidash Bishas Nidroi, and when he made the vow, he clarified, Davar Shenodarai Nishba Biglalai, the reason or the thing because of which he made the vow or the oath. That's like somebody who made his vow or oath dependent on that thing. And therefore, if that thing because of which he swore didn't come to pass or wasn't fulfilled, the whole vow is permitted. It's not even a binding vow. Ketzad, what would that look like? So the Rambam gives an example. Nadarei nishba, a person takes a vow or he takes an oath and he says, She'eni noisei isha pleinis she'avi hara. I'm not going to marry this woman. Why? Because her father has a bad reputation. He's a bad guy. She'eni nichnas lebayizeh she'kelev rabbe soichai. I'm not going into this house because there's a bad dog inside it. So now he's clarified that the only reason why he's not getting married or going into the house is because of the harmful elements that are attached to it. Mesu. So if the father or the dog die, or the father does repentance, and now he's not a bad guy anymore, the whole vow is permitted because now the reason that he made the vow doesn't exist. It's basically as though he would have vowed or swore and said, the only way I'm going to marry this woman, or the only way I'm going to go into this house, is if the damage is going to be removed. Once the damage is removed, the vow is no longer there. And the same thing applies in all similar situations. That's called Toile Nidrei Bedavar. He makes his vow contingent. But there's another category that sounds like it, not exactly the same. It's called Nidreish Gogos, inadvertent vows. What does that look like? That's basically a vow that's made on a mistaken premise. In this halacha, the father indeed was evil. The dog indeed was harmful. Just once they die, the vow is no longer there. What we're about to learn about now is a person who made a vow which was a mistake. In other words, the thing that he said was totally false. Aval hanoidoi hanishba, someone makes a vow or an oath and he says, She'eni noisei pleinis ha'ke'ura, I'm not going to marry this woman because she's ugly. This ugly woman. V'nimtzis no. Turns out she's actually beautiful. It was just
actually he never saw.
Yeah, exactly. He only heard a rumor, let's say, and he said, I'm not marrying the ugly woman. Well, it turns out she's beautiful. Shchayra v'nimtzis levana, or I'm not marrying this dark-skinned woman. Turns out she's light-skinned. K'tzara v'nimtzis haruka. I'm not marrying this woman who's a midget. Turns out she's tall. Kainam she'ein ishti nanisli sheganva es kisi. I take a vow of a sacrifice that my wife is never going to have benefit from me because she stole my wallet. V'shehiksa es b'ni, or because she abused my son. V'noida shalei ganva v'shalei hiksa. It turns out she never stole it. She never hit the child. Hareza mutter. These vows are permitted for a different reason. So simply a mistaken vow. It's literally in the category of inadvertent vows that are totally permitted. That's not like the other case where you depended your vow on something and then that thing didn't come to pass. The whole cause that made you make a vow wasn't even existing. It was a mistake to begin with. In the other case, it was real to begin with, and later on it was removed. Here, it was a mistake all the way in the beginning. Halacha daled v'lo. Not only that. What if a person sees from far, so here's the guy sitting on the park bench, he sees from far there's a group of guys, they're eating from his fig tree. V'amar lahen, so he shouts to them, Harehen aleichem karban. Those figs are a sacrifice to you. You can't eat them. Kevan shekarav aleihem, and then he keeps walking. He gets close to the group of people and he realizes it's his own relatives. V'hibit v'harehin aviv ve'echav. Turns out it's his father or his brothers. So here, he didn't even say a reason in his vow. He actually said, those figs are a sacrifice to you. But because it turns out that they're his own relatives, hare'elu mutarin, they're permitted. Even though in this case he didn't say the reason why he made the vow, it's as though he was explicit. Everyone understands. The only reason you would tell people not to eat your fruit is because you think it's strangers. The matter proves the only reason he forbade the fruit was because he thought they were strangers. Now that it turns out these relatives, they're permitted. And the same thing would apply in all similar situations. Now, what about if a future circumstance arose? Till now we're talking about things of the past. A mistaken premise, a real premise which turned out to be switched. What if you made a vow with no stipulations and later something new came up that forces you to reconsider? Misha nadar nishba. A person makes a vow or an oath, v'noilad loidavar shalehoya belibay b'shas hashvuay b'shas haneder, and a new thing arises, a new circumstance is born, which wasn't on his mind when he made the vow or the oath. Here, new circumstances can't retroactively nullify a vow. If a new circumstance arises and you want to therefore nullify your vow, you have to go to a rabbi and annul it like a regular vow would be annulled. Ketzad, what would that look like? You made a vow, you're never going to have benefit from a certain guy, or you're never going to go into a certain place. And that guy becomes the town scribe. Or that piece of land becomes the local shul. Now you need the scribe, you need the shul. What are you going to do? But when you made the vow, those circumstances weren't there. Even though the guy is saying, listen, had I known this guy was going to turn into a scribe, or this place was going to turn into a shul, I would never have made the vow or the oath. Doesn't matter. You cannot have benefit from the scribe. You cannot go into the shul till you nullify your vow. As we explained in the laws of oaths. Over there, the Rambam said, the person would actually rather, if you went into his mind, he would actually rather the guy never become the scribe in the first place and never have benefit. Now that he needs the scribe, it has to be released. And the same thing would apply in all similar situations. Another rule about vows, says the Rambam, Kol neder shehutar miktsasai hutar kulai. Any vow which was partially released is automatically fully released. That means if a vow contains multiple elements and one of the elements is cancelled, the whole thing is cancelled. V'hu adin b'shvua, same thing applies to oaths. Ketzad, what would that look like? What would that mean? A partially released vow. Again, the same scenario as before. A person sees a bunch of people from far eating his fruit. The Amar, and he says, they're a sacrifice to you, forbidden to you. When he gets to them, it's his father and strangers. So obviously now he wants his father to be allowed and everyone else to still be forbidden. But it's too bad. Since part of the vow was released, since his father was released, everybody is permitted. Even if he clearly says, had I known that my father and other people were together, I would have clearly said, this guy and this guy are forbidden, and my father is permitted, doesn't matter. In the end of the day, it was nullified partially, so it's totally nullified. But there's a difference between nullifying and qualifying. Qualifying means attaching a stipulation. If when he reaches the crowd he says, had I known that my father was among you, I would say, everybody is forbidden besides for my father. In other words, I would have made the father as a stipulation or a qualification to the vow. Then indeed everyone is forbidden except for the father. Because he has revealed his intention, he didn't mean to cancel part of the vow. He would have made the vow the same way he made the vow before. Just add a condition with the father. Adding a condition is very different than making a two-part vow. The same thing with a person who talks about not people but an object. Let's say wine. A person says, I'm making wine into a sacrifice unto me. I don't want to ever drink wine because I've heard that wine is bad for my intestines. They tell him, what are you talking about? Old wine, aged wine, is actually good for your intestines. So now it depends how he responds. You have to look carefully at his words. If he says, had I known, I would have never made the vow. Va'afilu amar, or even if he says, Ilu hayisi edeya hayisi eimer hachadash aser v'hayashan mutar, had I known, I would have clearly differentiated and said, new wine is forbidden, aged wine is permitted. Mutar b'yashanu v'chadash. In both of these scenarios, he's actually permitted in both. Once part of the vow has been permitted, everything is permitted. Avalim amar, but if the words he responds are, if he says, Ilu hayisi edeya hayisi eimer, had I known, I would have said the following: Kol hayenes asurin alai chutz min hamiyushan. All wine is forbidden to me besides for aged wine. So aged wine would have been a condition, not a separate category in the vow. Then he's permitted to have aged wine. And the same thing applies in all similar situations. Another important law about vows. Anybody who takes a vow or an oath, we have to look at the context. We can't just listen to his words. We have to see what made him say the words. And we figure out from the context what he meant. And we go after the context, not after the simple implication of his words. Classic example, says the Rambam. Ketzah, what would this look like? A person is carrying a massive load of wool or linen. And he was sweating, and he began to smell bad. And he was so fed up with this situation, he took an oath or he took a vow. These are his literal words. Wool or linen will never come upon me again. Now, looking at the context, it's easy to understand that all he meant was, I don't want to carry a load of wool and linen again. He can certainly wear a wool suit, linen clothes, cover himself with them. The only prohibition is to put them as a load, because that's what he was sick of. That's what he vowed against. Same thing if it was the opposite way. And he was wearing a wool sweater. Wool can be very scratchy to some people. A person was wearing a wool sweater, and he got pained, was causing him pain to wear them. And he makes an oath or a vow, wool will never come upon me again. So of course the context is clothing. He can't wear clothing or wool, but he can certainly carry a load of wool. He can also use a blanket made out of wool shearings, because the only situation that he meant was a woolen clothing. And the same thing applies in all similar situations, and the Rambam will describe a couple of more of these situations. Here's another one. People were asking him to marry his relative. In those times, it was very common that women needed marriage for basic support. People would marry their close relatives, a cousin, a niece. It's coming up Purim. According to some opinions, Mordechai and Esther were related. They were uncle and a niece. Mordechai married Esther because she didn't have a father or a mother to take care of her. So the person is bothering a guy to marry his relative. But he was refusing. He didn't want to marry this cousin or relative of his. And they were nudging him. They were begging him. So he, out of resentment, he made an oath or a vow. He said, you know what, this woman is never going to have any benefit from me, ever. So of course, the context is marriage, not any benefit. A person divorces his wife. And it's a bit bitter situation. And he makes a vow or an oath, this ex-wife of mine, never going to have any benefit from me, ever. So of course, these women are permitted to have benefit from this man. The only context of his vow, the meaning was for marital purposes. I'm not going to marry this woman. I don't want to be married to this woman anymore. But any other type of pleasure or any type of benefit, he can provide services for them, no problem. Similarly, another case. A person is inviting a friend for a dinner, for a meal, and the friend keeps refusing. And the guy keeps nudging. So what does he do? The guy is so fed up again, he makes a vow or an oath. You know what, man? I'm never going into your house. I'm not even going to drink a drop of cold water from your house. So of course, he can go into his house, he can drink cold water. All he meant was, I don't want to come to this party, don't you understand? So you have to go onto extreme measures to formulate his vow, but all he meant was for this particular meal. But he can for sure go into the house and drink a cup of cold water in his house as well. And the same thing in all similar situations. Another scenario. A person tells a friend, I swear, or I take a vow as a sacrifice, I'm never going into your house, I'm never buying your field. Bein beneder, bein bishvua, whether he formulates it as a vow or as an oath. And the owner of the house or the field dies or sells the house or the field to somebody else. So since he said your house or your field, the person who made the vow can go into the house, can buy the field from the heir, the person who inherits the house or the field, or the buyer who bought the house or the field. Because the person who made the vow only intended, as long as it's in the possession of the guy who was the subject of the vow, then it's forbidden. Once it leaves its possession, it's permitted. But if he says, I'm never going into this house or this field, even if the owner dies or passes it on to someone else, it's forbidden because he said this, not yours. This means it's always on this, the prohibition is always on the house or on the field. One farmer tells another, please lend me your cow. I need to do some plowing in my field. The guy says, sorry, it's not available. My cow is busy. Nishba nadar va'amar, again out of resentment. The guy vows or takes an oath and he says, you know what? Kainam sadi eini chayresh ba'la'olam. I take a sacrifice. I'm never going to plow my field with your cow. So here, it's a little more strict. If this farmer always plowed his field on his own, with his own hand, he indeed cannot use that cow, but anybody else, he can hire anybody else to use that guy's cow and plow his field. But if he doesn't usually plow his field by his own hand, here, him and everyone are forbidden. Because he made that vow, I'm never going to use your cow to plow, there the context, we take it literally. We say he actually meant, he was fed up and he meant, I'm never going to use the cow. And so nobody can use the cow for him, even in his agency. The same applies in all similar situations. Halacha Yud Gimel on the other side. Till now we're talking about vows of abstention. I'm going to stay away from certain things. What if a person takes a vow to do an action? Misha nishba oy nadar, a person takes a vow or an oath, sheyisa isha, oy sheyikna bayis, oy sheyetze b'shayara, oy yifresh bayam. I'm going to marry a woman, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to go out with a caravan, I'm going to go to sea. We don't force him to go and get married or buy a house or go on a trip right away. You made a vow, you're going to get married tomorrow. No. We let him wait. We allow him to wait to find something good that matches, a woman that's compatible with him, a home that suits his needs. Says the Rambam, Maisa be'isha. There was actually a story with a woman that happened to practically. She made a vow that anybody who asks her out for marriage, she's going to marry. And a bunch of people who were also not the most appropriate people jumped on her. The sages said, clearly the woman was just trying to get marriage proposals. All she meant was anybody who asks her out and will be compatible with her, she'll marry. She need not fulfill her vow in the most literal sense. But the same thing applies also in most situations.
Yes, I meant the first one.
Well, then take it. Yeah, sure. A person puts his friend under an oath or a vow and he tells him, I put you under a vow. Come to my storehouse and take a measurement of wheat or 2 barrels of wine. The person listening can release the vow without even asking a sage. He'll tell him, look, I know what you meant. All you wanted was to honor me, right? You want to give me a gift. It's my honor not to take it. Consider it as though I already got the honor that you wanted to give me. So then, the object is just the means to an end. He just wants the honor, not the actual object, so he can release the vow automatically. Same thing if a guy makes the vow the opposite way. Takes a vow or an oath, I swear, I'm not going to allow you to have any benefit from me till you give my son a measure of wheat or 2 barrels of wine. He can release his vow even without asking a sage. And you say, do you know what? I consider it as if I got the things and it came to my hand already, and that's it. In other words, this is part of the idea of the context. You go after the context.
But if it didn't get to his hand?
Doesn't matter, because clearly what he meant was that he wants to get his son some stuff. So if he says, okay, now I consider it as if he got it, so you're good. The same thing applies in all similar situations.